You keep telling yourself you are almost ready, just a little more money saved, just one more sign that it's the right time, but that moment never comes. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why waiting for it is the exact reason you're still standing still. You call this patience. It feels responsible. It feels wise. But patience and standing still are not the same thing, even though they feel identical from the inside. The wise man does not wait for conditions to become perfect. He watches for something else entirely, something most people miss completely because they are too busy waiting for the fog to clear before they move. You built your entire financial life around waiting for that fog to clear, and it has cost you more than any bad investment ever could. Machiavelli understood something about time that most people spend their entire lives refusing to accept. He said that men are undone not by the dangers in front of them, but by the years they hand over waiting for a danger to disappear that was never actually going to disappear on its own. Waiting does not lower the risk. Waiting simply changes who claims a reward. There is a word Machiavelli used for this, a word most people have never even heard. And once you understand it, you will never look at your own hesitation the same way again. He called it occasion, not a plan, not a stockpile of resources, not a feeling of confidence, just the opening itself, arriving without an announcement, wearing no label, offering no guarantee, and disappearing the instant you decide you need more information before you move. Ask yourself something honest right now. How many moments have already walked past you while you were still preparing to be ready for them? Sit with that question, because everything that follows depends on you being willing to admit something uncomfortable. You were never actually waiting for the right time. You were waiting for the feeling of safety that no timing has ever provided anyone in any century, in any market, in any empire that was ever built. I already know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking of the person who jumped too early, who gambled everything on a moment that turned out to be nothing, who lost it all chasing a door that was never really open. Keep that story close. Do not throw it away, because by the end of this, you will see exactly why that failure happened, and exactly why it has nothing to do with what I am about to teach you. The man who moves without reading the moment is not bold. He is careless, wearing the costume of courage. What follows is not a lesson in recklessness. It is a lesson in recognition, in learning to see occasion the instant it appears, instead of recognizing it only in hindsight, long after it has already made someone else wealthy. Machiavelli wrote that fortune itself, behaves like a river in flood season. When it rises, it destroys everything in its path, drowns the fields, tears down the walls people believe were permanent, and reshapes the entire landscape in a single violent afternoon. Most men watch this flood and conclude that fortune simply cannot be resisted, that some people are chosen and some are not, that the river decides everything and the man decides nothing. He rejected that conclusion completely. He believed that fortune only controls half of what happens. The other half, he said, still belongs to us, or very nearly half, because she is generous enough to leave the rest of the governing to man. The flood comes regardless. But the man who builds his defenses before the season arrives, who studies the rain instead of ignoring it, is not swept away the same way the man who assumed the sky would stay clear forever is swept away. This is a part almost nobody tells you about wealth. It does not arrive on a predictable schedule. It does not knock twice. It rises like a river in flood, unannounced, indifferent to whether you feel prepared. And the only people who benefit from it are the ones who had already built something capable of catching the water when it came. Look at how Machiavelli described the men who actually founded new principalities, the ones history remembers as more than fortunate, the ones remembered as capable. He did not say they were lucky. He said they were given occasion, an opportunity, nothing more than raw material, and what separated them from everyone else who received a similar opportunity was a quality he called virtue. Not virtue in the soft, modern sense of being good. Virtue meant skill, force of will, the capacity to act decisively the instant the opening appeared, rather than admiring the opening from a comfortable distance while someone else walked through it. Without occasion, virtue has nothing to work with. A man can be as capable as any conqueror in history, and it will mean nothing if no door ever opens in front of him. But here is the half of the equation people conveniently forget. Without virtue, occasion is meaningless too. The door opens for hundreds of people every single year, and almost all of them stand there admiring the doorway. taking notes on its architecture, waiting for a more convenient entrance to reveal itself, while one person simply walks through before it closes again. This is the exact mechanism behind almost every fortune that looks, from the outside, like pure luck. It never was pure luck. It was a moment recognized and seized by someone who had already spent years quietly building capacity to move the instant that moment appeared. The rest of the crowd calls it luck, because luck is a far more comfortable explanation than admitting they saw the same door and simply did not walk through it. Consider how uncomfortable the alternative explanation actually is. If it was luck, nothing about the outcome reflects on the people who missed it. Luck is random, impersonal, distributed without regard to merit, and therefore nobody watching from the sidelines has to examine their own hesitation too closely. But if it was occasion, recognized by one person and missed by everyone else standing in the exact same room, then the outcome suddenly says something uncomfortable about every single person who saw the same opening and let it pass. This is precisely why luck remains a more popular explanation, even when the evidence points somewhere else entirely. It protects a crowd from having to ask the only question that actually matters, which is not why fortune chose someone else, but why they themselves chose to wait. Lesson 1. Opportunity announces nothing. Here is the first illusion you must destroy, because it is the one quietly running your entire financial life. You are picturing opportunity as something that will eventually present itself clearly, wrapped in obvious certainty, accompanied by enough evidence that saying yes will feel completely safe. That moment does not exist. It has never existed, for anyone in any era. Machiavelli studied men who founded entire principalities from nothing, and what struck him was not that fortune handed them a gift wrapped in clarity. It handed them chaos, a broken structure, a population without direction, a landscape nobody else wanted to touch precisely because it looked too uncertain to bother with. The opportunity was there because it was uncomfortable. If it had been comfortable, it would already have been taken by someone else long before they ever arrived. This is a trap almost everyone falls into without realizing it. They are waiting for the discomfort to disappear before they consider a decision worth making, when the discomfort itself is the only reason a decision is still available to them at all. The instant something becomes obviously safe, obviously certain, obviously guaranteed, it stops being an opportunity and becomes a commodity everyone else is already buying at a worse price than the one you could have gotten while it still felt frightening. This is why the search for a risk-free version of any real opportunity is, in practice, a search for something that ceases to exist the moment it is found. The version of the opportunity available once every risk has been removed is no longer the same opportunity at all. It is what remains after everyone bold enough to move early has already captured the value that made it worth pursuing in the first place. What is left over for the cautious is rarely the same prize. It is the leftover, priced accordingly, and mistaken by the person collecting it for the original opportunity they have been waiting for all along. Lesson 2. Preparation is not action. There is a specific kind of person who feels productive while accomplishing nothing, and it is worth naming clearly because so many mistake it for discipline. They read constantly. They study endlessly. They collect course after course, book after book, framework after framework, and they call this preparation. In truth, much of it has quietly become a performance of readiness designed to postpone the actual risk of acting. Machiavelli respected preparation deeply. He believed a prince should study war even during peacetime, precisely so he would not be caught unprepared when conflict finally arrived. But preparation, in his mind, existed to serve action, not replace it. A man who studies war forever and never lead an army has not outprepared anyone. He has simply found an intelligent-looking way to avoid the battlefield entirely. Ask yourself honestly where you currently stand. Are you preparing to act, or are you using preparation as a socially acceptable disguise for standing still? The difference is not always obvious from the outside, because both versions look identical to a casual observer. Both involve reading. Both involve planning. But one version has a deadline attached to it, a moment where the studying stops and the moving begins. The other version has no deadline at all, only an endless horizon of one more thing to learn before it would finally be responsible to begin. Lesson 3. Fortune favors the bold. This is a line people quote constantly and understand almost never. Machiavelli did not mean that recklessness gets rewarded. He meant something far more specific. and far more uncomfortable. He believed fortune, like an unpredictable force that cannot be reasoned with through caution alone, responds better to men who confront her directly than to men who approach her carefully, timidly, try to manage her instead of meeting her. Think about what this actually means in practical terms. The cautious man waits for fortune to prove herself trustworthy before he commits anything, but fortune, by her very nature, never provides that proof in advance. She only reveals whether she was generous after the decision has already been made. This means the bold man is not gambling blindly. He understands something the cautious man refuses to accept, that certainty was never actually available to either of them, and only one of them was honest enough to act despite that truth instead of pretending that more waiting would eventually manufacture certainty out of thin air. The boldness Machiavelli respected was never the boldness of ignoring risk. It was a boldness of acknowledging risk fully and still choosing to move, because standing still carried its own risk that simply felt quieter, and therefore felt safer, even though it was slowly costing just as much. Lesson 4. Delay always has a price. Here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Waiting feels like it costs nothing. No money leaves your account while you wait. No contract gets signed. No risk gets taken. It feels in the moment like the safest possible position available to you. This feeling is precisely why waiting has quietly bankrupted more potential fortunes than any reckless decision ever has. The cost of delay does not show up as a withdrawal from your bank account. It shows up as a version of your life you could have been living, invisible, unmeasured, and therefore easy to ignore. A door closes somewhere while you are still deciding whether to knock. A market shifts while you are still researching whether it is worth entering. A relationship, a partnership, an opening that existed only because the timing happened to be right, quietly stops existing while you wait for a feeling of readiness that was never actually going to arrive on its own. Machiavelli warned that men who delay too long often find that the moment they eventually act, the very conditions that made action valuable have already disappeared. The river has receded. The field has already been claimed by someone else. And the cruelest part is that this cost rarely announces itself. Nobody sends you a bill for the opportunity you let pass. You simply continue living, quietly unaware of the entire branch of your life that closed itself off the day you decided more certainty was needed before moving forward. Lesson 5. Recognition before courage. It would be a mistake to conclude from everything said so far that courage alone is sufficient. Courage without recognition is simply recklessness, wearing a more flattering name. The men Machiavelli admired, most were not simply willing to act. They were capable of reading a moment accurately before committing to it, distinguishing a genuine opening from a mirage that only resembled one. This is a skill, not a personality trait, and it can be built the same way any other skill is built, through study and repetition. It means learning to read markets, read timing, read the underlying structure beneath the surface level opportunity, so that when a genuine occasion appears, you recognize it immediately instead of hesitating long enough for someone else to recognize it first. It also means learning to walk away from something that looks like opportunity, but is actually noise, dressed up convincingly enough to fool anyone who is not trained their eye to notice the difference. This is precisely why waiting and readiness are not the same thing, even though they feel similar from the inside. Readiness means you have built the judgment required to recognize occasion instantly. Waiting means you convince yourself that judgment will eventually arrive on its own, without you ever having to sharpen it through actual decisions made under actual uncertainty. Lesson 6. The cost of being wrong. Somewhere beneath every delayed decision sits the same quiet fear. What if this is the wrong move? What if I commit and it fails publicly, in front of everyone who already doubted me? This fear feels like wisdom because it dresses itself in the language of caution, but it is worth examining honestly, because it rarely protects you from the outcome it claims to be protecting you from. Machiavelli observed something about men who avoided decisive action out of fear of failure. They did not actually avoid failure. They simply exchanged one kind of failure, visible and immediate, for another kind, invisible and slow, spread out quietly across years of never having tried at all. The man who acts and fails at least learns something the moment collapses. He can adjust, rebuild, try again with sharper judgment. The man who never acts learns nothing, because there was never a decision sharp enough to generate a lesson in the first place. This is why the fear of being publicly wrong so often produces something far worse than public failure. It produces private stagnation, a life quietly organized around avoiding embarrassment rather than pursuing anything meaningful. And stagnation rarely announces itself as failure, because nobody is watching closely enough to call it that. It simply accumulates year after year, until an entire decade has passed without a single decisive moment inside it. Lesson 7. Small risks build instinct. Nobody begins by recognizing a fortune-defining opportunity the first time it appears. This is one of the most overlooked truths in this entire subject. The capacity to recognize occasion at scale is built by first recognizing it at a smaller scale, repeatedly, until the instinct becomes sharp enough to trust with something larger. Think of it as a form of training most people skip entirely because it looks unglamorous. Saying yes to the smaller opening, the modest opportunity that will not change your life, but will sharpen your ability to act under incomplete information. A modest investment made before it felt fully comfortable. A small negotiation entered before every variable was known. A minor risk taken specifically because it built the muscle required for a larger risk later. Machiavelli understood this principle in the context of a new prince gaining territory gradually, testing his instincts on smaller conflicts before attempting anything that could threaten the entire principality if it failed. The same logic governs financial judgment. The person who has never acted on uncertainty in a small way will almost never act correctly on uncertainty in a large way because the instinct simply was never built. They will freeze precisely when speed matters most because freezing was always a default response and nothing in their history ever taught them otherwise. Lesson 8. The myth of a better later. There is a particular kind of self-deception worth naming directly because almost everyone practices it without realizing what they are doing. It is a quiet belief that a future version of the same opportunity, cleaner, safer, more certain, will eventually present itself if you simply wait long enough. This belief feels reasonable. It is almost never true. Machiavelli never promised that a better version of an opportunity would eventually appear if the current one was declined. Fortune does not operate that generously. Most doors that close do not reopen in an improved form later. They simply close, and an entirely different door eventually opens somewhere else at a different time, requiring a different decision, with no guarantee it will be any easier to recognize or any less uncomfortable to walk through. This means the mental habit of postponing a decision in hopes of a cleaner version arriving later is rarely a strategy at all. It is a story told to make the postponement feel intelligent rather than fearful. The honest question is never whether a better opportunity might appear eventually. Something always appears eventually. The honest question is whether you will have built the judgment and the courage to recognize it when it does, given that you fail to recognize the one currently standing in front of you. Lesson 9. Boldness needs structure. It would be incomplete to end this discussion without addressing the failure stories, because they are real and they deserve honesty rather than dismissal. Some people do move quickly, seize what looks like an opening, and lose everything as a result. This happens, and pretending it does not would make everything said here dishonest. But look closely at what actually happened in those situations. Almost without exception, the person who moved and lost had confused speed with recklessness. They acted on a moment without first building the guardrails Machiavelli insisted every capable ruler needed. Reserves, contingencies, an honest read of the actual terrain rather than a hopeful one. Speed without structure is not boldness. It is simply recklessness moving quickly enough to cause more damage than it would have caused standing still. This is why recognizing occasion and acting on it recklessly are two entirely different behaviors that only look similar from a distance. The strategist studies the moment quickly, but studies it honestly, calculates the downside before committing, and builds enough a foundation underneath the decision that a single miscalculation cannot erase everything. The gambler skips a step entirely and calls the resulting chaos bad luck, when it was, in nearly every case, the absence of structure that discipline would have provided in a matter of days, not years. Consider what this looks like in practice. Before committing to any genuine opening, the strategist asks a short list of unglamorous questions. What happens if this fails completely? Can the loss be absorbed without threatening everything else already built? What is the smallest version of this commitment that still lets me test whether the moment is real before I commit everything to it? These questions take minutes, not months, and they are precisely what separates a calculated leap from a blind one. The gambler skips them entirely because slowing down, even briefly, feels like the very hesitation he has trained himself to avoid. But there is a meaningful difference between the hesitation that lets fortune slip away and the brief discipline that keeps a genuine opportunity from becoming a self-inflicted disaster. Confusing the two has ruined more good instincts than caution ever has, and separating them clearly is what allows boldness to remain a strength instead of quietly becoming a liability. Lesson 10, the door I let close. There was a season, early in the Machiavellian's own rise, when an opening appeared that he did not take. A partnership, modest in size but rare in timing, offered him at a moment when everything about it felt too soon, too uncertain, too far outside what felt like a safe next step. He told himself he would revisit it once he had more capital, more proof, more certainty behind him. He was, by his own account, being responsible. The opening did not wait. Someone else recognized what he had hesitated over, moved within days, and built from it something the Machiavellian would spend the following 3 years watching from the outside, understanding fully, for the first time, what Machiavelli meant when he wrote that fortune shows her back to those who hesitate and her face only to those willing to meet her directly. He had not lacked the capability. He had lacked the willingness to act while the moment was still uncomfortable enough to still be available. What changed after that season was not his intelligence. It was his relationship with uncertainty itself. He stopped treating discomfort as a signal to wait and started treating it as the very evidence that a real opportunity was standing in front of him. Because comfortable opportunities, he had learned, are rarely opportunities by the time they reach anyone paying enough attention to notice them. Every decision made since then carried a simple, private rule, one he never spoke aloud but never abandoned either. If it feels early enough to be uncomfortable, it is very likely still early enough to matter. Lesson 11, stop comparing timelines. There's a quiet trap that catches even people who have already accepted everything said so far. They agree that occasion must be seized quickly. They agree that waiting has a cost. And then they make a different mistake entirely. They look at someone else's opportunity, someone else's timing, someone else's door, and they measure their own life against a moment that was never actually theirs to seize. Machiavelli never suggested that every man receives the same occasion at the same age, in the same form, on the same schedule. He studied rulers who rose in their 20s and rulers who rose only after decades of quiet positioning, and he drew no conclusion that one path was more legitimate than the other. What mattered was not when the opportunity arrived. What mattered was whether the man was capable of recognizing at the moment it did. This distinction matters because so much hesitation is quietly fueled by comparison rather than genuine uncertainty. You see someone younger already building something you have not yet started, and instead of asking whether your own moment has arrived, you ask why theirs came first. That question has no useful answer, and chasing it only distracts you from the actual door standing in front of you right now, the one that has nothing to do with anyone else's timeline, and everything to do with whether you are paying attention to your own. The man obsessed with someone else's occasion will miss his own, because attention is finite, and every hour spent measuring another man's rise is an hour not spent reading the terrain of his own life. Fortune does not distribute opportunity evenly across ages or circumstances. She distributes it unpredictably, and the only sane response is to stop comparing your calendar to anyone else's and start studying your own surroundings closely enough to notice what is actually available to you right now, regardless of what stage anyone else appears to be standing at. Lesson 12. Build your reserve first. Recognizing occasion is only half the equation, because recognition without the capacity to act on it produces nothing but frustration. This is why every capable strategist builds something quietly, in the background, long before any specific opportunity appears. A reserve, not simply money set aside, though that matters, but a broader capacity, financial, informational, relational, that allows immediate movement the instant a genuine opening reveals itself. Machiavelli warned that a prince who has neglected his own defenses during peacetime will find himself unable to respond decisively the moment conflict arrives, no matter how badly he wishes to act. The same principle governs financial opportunity, with almost mechanical precision. The person with no reserve, no flexibility, no capacity to move without first scrambling to gather resources, will watch occasion appear and disappear in the time it takes them to become ready. while someone who quietly prepared in advance moves within days. This is why the months and years before any specific opportunity appears are never wasted, provided they are spent building capacity rather than simply consuming comfort. A small reserve set aside deliberately, a skill sharpened before it is needed, a relationship maintained before any favor is required of it. None of this looks exciting from the outside, and none of it produces a visible reward in the moment it is being built. But it is precisely this invisible preparation that determines whether you become the person who seizes the next occasion or the person who watches someone else seize it because they happen to already have what the moment required. The tragedy is not that opportunity failed to appear. The tragedy is that it appeared, and by the time you assemble what you need to act on it, someone who had already built their reserve in silence had already claimed it. Fortune does not wait for you to catch up. She simply moves on to whoever was already standing ready. Lesson 13. Know when not to move. It would be dishonest to end this without addressing the opposite failure, because chasing every opening that resembles occasion is its own quiet form of ruin. Not everything that looks like a moment actually is one. Some doors only appear open. Some rivers only appear ready to be redirected. The strategist who cannot tell the difference will exhaust himself chasing illusions dressed up convincingly enough to fool an untrained eye. Machiavelli understood that even the boldest prince had to know when patience genuinely served him, distinguishing a true opening from a trap disguised as one. This is not a contradiction of everything said earlier. It is the other half of the same skill. Recognizing occasion requires just as much capacity to walk away from a false signal as it requires courage to move on a true one, and confusing the two produces exactly the kind of reckless failure that gives waiting its bad reputation in the first place. The discipline here is subtle. It means asking honestly whether an opportunity is genuinely time-sensitive, or whether the pressure to act quickly is simply manufactured urgency designed to prevent careful thought. It means distinguishing between fear of missing out, which clouds judgment, and genuine recognition of a closing window, which sharpens it. The man who cannot tell these apart will eventually move too quickly on something that deserved more scrutiny, and he will call the resulting loss proof that boldness itself was a mistake, when the actual mistake was failing to develop the judgment required to separate real occasion from its many convincing imitations. This is why everything taught here depends on one final quality: patience and speed operating together rather than as opposites. Patience while studying the terrain. Speed the moment the terrain reveals a genuine opening. Most people only ever master one half of this equation, and a man who is only one half will either freeze permanently or gamble recklessly. The rare few who master both are the ones history eventually calls fortunate, though fortune, as always, had very little to do with it. Lesson 14. What gets passed down. There is a final layer to this worth naming, because it explains why some families seem to produce person after person capable of recognizing occasion, while others produce generation after generation that watches opportunity pass by with almost identical hesitation each time. What gets inherited is rarely a specific opportunity. It is a relationship with uncertainty itself, absorbed quietly, long before anyone in the family ever names it directly. A child raised watching a parent hesitate endlessly, waiting for permission that never arrives, absorbs something far more powerful than any single missed opportunity. He absorbs a template, an unspoken assumption that uncertainty is dangerous, that moving before feeling ready is irresponsible, that the safest posture available to a person is to wait until someone else proves the path first. This template rarely gets discussed at the dinner table, and yet it shapes decisions for decades, quietly determining which doors get walked through and which get explained away. A child raised watching a parent move decisively under incomplete information absorbs a different template entirely, one where discomfort is simply the price of admission rather than a signal to retreat. Machiavelli understood that a new prince who successfully seizes territory does something more valuable than acquiring land. He demonstrates, to everyone watching, including his own descendants, that territory can in fact be seized, that fortune can in fact be met directly rather than only observed from a safe distance. This demonstration becomes inheritance in its own right, separate from any wealth that follows it. This is why breaking a pattern of hesitation matters beyond immediate opportunity currently in front of you. Every time you choose to act instead of wait, you are not only claiming whatever this particular occasion offers, you are quietly rewriting the template that gets passed down to whoever is watching you closely enough to absorb it, whether that is a child, a younger colleague, or simply the future version of yourself who will remember years from now, whether this was a moment you finally stopped waiting for a feeling that was never actually coming. You were taught that patience is a virtue, and in many corners of life, it still is. But somewhere along the way, patience was quietly confused with paralysis, and an entire generation learned to call their hesitation wisdom simply because hesitation felt safer than the alternative. It was never safer. It was only quieter about the cost it was charging. This does not mean charge blindly into every opening that presents itself. Recklessness was never the lesson here, and confusing the two would undo everything said in the last few minutes. A man who moves without reading the terrain is not bold. He is simply unlucky in a way that was entirely avoidable. The lesson is recognition paired with willingness, judgment sharp enough to see occasion clearly, and courage steady enough to act on it before the feeling of certainty ever arrives, because that feeling was never actually coming. Understand also that this is not knowledge you absorb once and carry forward automatically. The instinct to wait, to hesitate, to search for one more sign before committing, does not disappear after a single video. It has to be confronted every time a real opening appears. Tested again, refined again, because comfort has a way of quietly returning the moment vigilance relaxes. That returning discomfort, each time, is simply proof the lesson is still being tested, not proof that it failed to take hold. Consider, for a moment, what an entire life built on this single shift would actually look like. Not a life without fear, because fear never fully disappears for anyone, in any century. A life where fear stops being mistaken for a stop sign and starts being recognized for what it actually is, the exact feeling that accompanies every genuine occasion that has ever mattered. The absence of fear was never the requirement for acting. It was never even possible. The requirement was always the willingness to act while the fear was still present, because waiting for it to disappear first was always a request that fortune had no intention of granting. Somewhere right now, an opening exists that you have already noticed and already begun explaining away. Perhaps it is too early. Perhaps it feels unready. Perhaps you've already told yourself that revisiting it later, once things feel more certain, is the responsible path forward. Sit with the possibility, just for a moment, that later is not actually coming, and that the discomfort you're feeling right now is not a warning sign at all. It may simply be what occasion always feels like, the instant before someone decides whether they're the kind of person who walks through it or the kind of person who explains years from now exactly why they didn't. If this video shifted the way you see waiting, don't just scroll past it, like this video. Drop a comment telling me which strategy hit you the hardest, and subscribe, because every video on this channel is built to sharpen your mind and separate you from the crowd that stays comfortable. No fluff, no noise, just doctrine. Most people don't lose this game. They just never played it.